Hey everybody, what's up? JB here from Tell Me You're Joking, pun intended. Especially in today's environment, I think we all wake up on the daily, pour our coffees, rub our eyes, splash a little cold water in our face, and then stare at our devices and wonder, do I really want to open it? Well, we do. And hence, Tell Me You're Joking. It's I made that up years ago in jest, and little did I know that it would become literally my mantra and name of this show. So today's going to be a fun one because, as you guys know, I like to rotate between pop politico and all the taboo because I firmly believe that when being afraid of taboo subject matter with friends, family, etc., that fear over generations has resulted in the bullshit we have today. So because we can't talk with each other, alas, that fear of opening our phones. So therefore, tell me you're joking. I'm going to put this shit on the table. Tell me the taboo topics. And nothing is more taboo than politics, right? Maybe religion, but I think that's slowly becoming a distant second in today's environment. Even though there's an overlap there, the Venn diagram it's actually a circle. They're not two different things. And joining me from the far northern regions of the Show Me State district, that is, when I looked at it on the map this morning, because again, those of you know me know I don't do a lot of research, but I'm like, okay, Missouri 6, let me look at this thing. And I'm like, damn, gerrymandered. It touches the west coast of the state, the western border, the eastern border, the northern border, and it just conveniently misses all those little blue dots that kind of skirt the edges. Hence, it's a heavy Republican district, Missouri 6, running in the Democratic primary for the seat. Mr. Josh Smead, how's it going, Josh?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, JB. I appreciate what you're doing with this. And yeah, these conversations could not be more important at a time like this, especially. So I'm very grateful to be here.
Let's start with Missouri 6.
hmm hmm
Being a Missouri 2 resident, I joke about your district being gerrymandered. That southern border of your line looks awfully jaggedy.
Yeah.
Um, Missouri 2 here with Missouri 1 right next to me where I'm sitting right now, St. Louis City and kind of the northern part, and then 2's all cut up with my, I think I have a rep. Her name is Ann Wagner. Nobody's
Ah,
seen her. Um,
yeah, that's an
but
affliction a lot of those reps have. They
Yeah,
just
I
don't
think she's
show. Yeah.
based on the due, she's probably at the salon somewhere buried in Baldwin. I don't know. Um, I think about,
hmm
like, I know who the people are, right?
hmm hmm
And as much as it's cut up, the reality is combining kind of 1 and 2 because we are a region. We're not
hmm
as far spread out as your district. We are purple. At the end of the day,
hmm
it's purple. But Mo 6 is different. Can you take
hmm
a second and give me, maybe your 101 on, if if a foreign resident were to come here and say, "Can you tell me about your district? What does it
hmm
look like?" How would you describe Missouri 6 in Missouri terms?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been really coming to love this district as I've been traveling around it. So, I put almost 5,000 miles on the car so far during this campaign. As you mentioned, it's an enormous district. So, it is basically the northern third of the entire state of Missouri. Goes from the Mississippi River to the Missouri River, the whole border of Iowa. Currently, in its I say pre-gerrymandered, of course, in the context of the latest legislation through Jeff City. The old district had 39 counties. So with the new maps they're trying to push through, which I do think are completely unconstitutional and illegal the way they're doing it, would actually remove 6 of my counties from the current district. So we'd go down to 33. And I'm based in Liberty, which is kind of on the southwest corner of it. Obviously right outside North Kansas City area. So the bulk of my population in my district is Clay, Platte, and Buchanan counties. So sort of the southwest corner down here. But this district, I've been really enjoying getting out and seeing it because we have a lot of really interesting things kind of spread out across, the far reaches of rural Missouri. We've got everything from there's the Pony Express Museum in Chillicothe, or sorry, in St. Joseph, the Sliced Bread Museum in Chillicothe, Walt Disney's Main Street USA in Marceline. We've got out in Hannibal, the Mark Twain childhood home. We have the Lewis and Clark Trail, which goes through a chunk of the district. So there's a lot of really interesting history here, and I see the Missouri Six as kind of a great intersection of sort of that westward expansion of
Mm-hmm.
where we came in the early formulation of the country. But then we see a lot of the same issues across the country where people consolidate in the urban areas. So a lot of the counties in the sixth district, and this is the case all across rural America, they have a fraction of the population today that they had back in the 50s and the 60s.
Right.
So, a lot of the shuttered homes and closed up storefronts, that you tend to see, is really emblematic of sort of big issues that are not going away anytime soon. But in my opinion, have really continued to get worse and worse, as we've seen these generations of Republican
So,
policies.
so let me ask you this then, because
Mhm.
what you're describing is really kind of a it's not a unique phenomenon. It's really a national norm, and that is when you look at these districts, specifically in purple to red states, you do have a large number of counties, but what is it? John King on CNN, The Magic Wall. It always comes down to like one or two counties. And Missouri
Yes.
6 is no different. You just
Hmm.
listed the three counties up in that southwest district just north of Kansas City.
Hmm.
That the reality is, to win Missouri 6, you need some combination of numbers from there, and then the
Hmm.
rest of the district becomes more of a talking point. How do you take that reality, because it's nice to hear about the sliced bread museum and all this other stuff, but I
Hmm.
think you would agree, you seem to be a pragmatist. That's cute, but we have bigger issues. I need to win. So how
Hmm.
do you respect the district as a whole and
Hmm.
approach it without kind of discounting the other 30 counties
Hmm.
that mathematically don't equate to relevance in a race like yours?
Yes, and that's a sort of an interesting, approach that we have to take with this. So my general philosophy is, while the population, are lower, obviously, like we've got counties out here that have 4 or 5 thousand people total in the whole county, versus the 250,000 some odd in Clay County where I'm at, which is the highest population of any county. So, but what I'm noticing as I'm going out is, there are Democrats in every far reach of rural America. And I think that it's incredibly important that the Democratic Party has a presence. So even if we say, well, I'm less likely to get the votes I need from Putnam County, I'm still going to go up to Unionville and have a meeting with a half a dozen people, because we're still hearing from them directly on what's impacting them, which does impact all of us. So it's a little deceiving. The district is so large, but like I'm going out to Moberly later today, which is a little over halfway across. It's about 2.5 hours away. So, a drive, not terrible. However, there's a lot of good Democrats out in these places. And I think one of the things that I'm noticing that the Democrats maybe could focus on a bit more, and I'm trying to do it by example. I'll just give you an example of an event I went to in Chariton County, which is right in the center of the state. I went to a Chariton County cake auction the Democrats were putting on. And the cakes are going for $200-300 a piece. And I usually like to participate in those. It's kind of nice to feel like, you're part of the group. It's too rich for my blood, and it's surprising. We're out here, it feels like the middle of nowhere. Where's all this money come from,
Yeah.
And that's one thing that somebody was telling me. They're like, you probably don't realize there's a lot of money in Chariton County. So I feel like the Democrats overall, we tend to boil things down to the spreadsheet. And we say, this is the demographic and this is what we need to focus on that's safe. But we're doing that at the cost of ignoring huge amounts of people. Even if the majority of my population is, down in this corner, kind of where I'm at in North Kansas City, if you add up all of the Democrats across all the rural places too, they make a pretty sizable chunk of the population as well. So it takes a spread out approach, which is just going to be the name of the game when we have such a large district.
So then let me get your take, because some of the statistics, because prior to jumping on here, I told you, I got a background, a degree in political science and economics, and when it comes
Mhm.
to numbers, I really nerd out. So I
Mhm.
did look at the kind of the baseline statistics of the district, and I'll just run through some of them and then tie together a couple of questions here. Population is what it is. It's roughly an eighth of the state at 785,000. Your median income, single is 36K, household is 71K. 86% white, median age is 39, which kind of surprised me. But
Hmm.
now that I'm thinking of that southwest corner, maybe not as much.
Hmm.
The home price really was one that was a shocker. Median price 227,000. The national median is now pushing low 400s, high 300s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other number, which kind of correlates, is it's a fairly low college education attainment level at 27%.
Hmm.
So here's where I'm going with this,
Hmm.
and I like that you told kind of the anecdotal story of these $300 cakes, and hey, we exist too out here in the far reaches.
Hmm.
Do you think that the Democratic Party in general, national, and obviously whittling it down here, do you think they're just missing the reality that we are now kind of moving away from this left-right spectrum and more of a north-south spectrum when it comes to access, income, et cetera? Because I'm looking at these numbers.
Hmm.
Median income is low, and the
Hmm.
age is low, and we all know we have a demographic issue. We are
Hmm.
losing population.
Yes.
So
Yes.
so here's where I'm going with this. If you had to define the target or the kind of average constituent in your district, what do they look like given the expanse and the misnomer of, well, the rural's all poor, but they're buying $300 cakes, and the cities are
Hmm.
killing it, but you've got a very low median income.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's just it, though, is that I think that we tend to look, and that's kind of been the trend of the Democratic Party, has been to look at these rural places as though it is an other, There are people with low incomes in the urban core as well. Obviously the home prices and such, a lot of that has to do with, there's a lot of land available, there's a lot more spread out. And there's not as much demand that is going into those rural places. The populations are declining, but um, I think that's been one of the things that's kind of stuck with me the most as I've been going through this and talking with all the people that I have. Obviously we have different professions. I'm an architect. I deal with buildings, and the whole process through that. And then when I'm talking with people who are in agriculture, completely different. However, it's similar in some ways because we're talking seasonal. They're much more seasonal in that, dealing with, obviously planting seasons, things like that. But in architecture, we're also dealing with seasons. You can't pour
Yeah.
concrete quite as easy in winter, things like that, right? So where I'm going with that is, I've been finding the people who I'm talking to are much less of an other, much less of a different group of Americans. Like we're all very much the same, and there's so much crossover between all of us. People who live way out in the most rural areas will still make their way down to Chillicothe or wherever, to get gas because it's 5 cents cheaper down there. There's so much of this intermingling.
They'll burn 9 cents more a gallon to go get 5 cent cheaper
It's true.
gas.
It's true. Yeah. And the math works out, right? I trust them. But no,
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what we've kind of at our own peril have kind of seen, what is the definition of someone who lives out in these rural places? And we paint it in such a way, but that is so often just not accurate because, they're just like you and me, like someone like you, I expect to see out in Marceline, like without a question,
Yeah.
people
So
with great
let,
educations and great jobs. I mean, they're everywhere.
let
So,
me let me jump in on that though, because
mhm, mhm.
I death scroll and like
Yeah, don't we
these
all, right?
subject
Yeah.
matters, and the current representative up there, Sam Graves. I'm just going to call
Mhm,
spade a spade here. When you look at his narrative, his language, his posts, his
mhm,
retweets, etc. It's pretty simple to describe, and I'm not quoting him. I'm just paraphrasing in totality what he puts out there. He basically paints a picture that there are woke Bernie Sanders libs on
yeah.
one side, and then there's us
Mhm,
people on the other
mhm,
side,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it,
That's his whole deal. And that, and just as a thought I have on that too, one of the most ironic things. So he's the guy who's out there. He's the chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee,
mm,
and he is against anything that he calls the Green New Deal. If you go up in the northwest corner of the state where he's based in Tarkio and look at the wind turbines, they cover the horizon. So, and they power obviously the local communities. They fund schools. I mean, they're used within the communities that he lives in and the
Yep.
people he lives in. And they act as though this is like a foreign thing that only the urban city dwellers. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's not the
no,
case.
no. Like in current, in real time at the time of this recording, right? Along the lines of what you're describing, they're anti-green energy, even though they pocket green energy and it benefits their constituents, and they're
Hmm. Hmm.
anti-global warming, or it's fake. But yet we're threatening to take Greenland because the
Yeah.
ice is melting and Russia can get through. So
Yeah.
so it's all.
Is global warming real or not? Pick
So,
it.
so let me ask you specifically your
Yeah.
own strategy then when it comes to
Hmm.
that kind of defining narratives,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
the constituents, who's the target, who are you looking to help? Where are you? Because Graves and the rest, they are following Trump's
Hmm.
strategy, top to bottom.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
want it to be divisive. They want to make sure that everybody claims a clan, and that's how you're going to vote based upon your fears of pronouns or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So
Correct.
how do you, because, and I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, because you do have
Hmm.
to you have to win a primary first.
Hmm.
Assuming you do, or if you do, how do you approach that without just putting the gloves on as well and saying, all right, mofo, let's do this.
Yeah.
Because that's what is happening nationally.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. Well, I think to a degree, I think that there is a certain healthy, it makes people feel better if they see their representative with the gloves on punching back, because we're in a position right now where we hear the most outlandish things coming from a lot of times these Republicans, just like Sam Graves, and they say these things that, like, for example, I'll give you a great example here. So he, as you've said, he markets himself as though he's for the farmer, he's for the common guy. When in reality, you look at his FEC filings, you look at where he gets his money, all corporations. I probably have more grassroots donors than he does, in the state of Missouri. The majority of his money is coming from those big pocket people. And when we're looking at something like he's big on clean water. So he wants to deregulate and basically make it so that if you have a wetland, this is a big point of discussion. If there's something that's considered a wetland, the federal government will basically come in and say, hey, we need additional review. So that is that red tape, right? So what he's done then is he comes in and he says, there's a farmer trying to build a barn, or there's a family trying to build a single family house on their property, and they can't do that because these Democrats and their regulation, they're worried about the climate, are making all this red tape they can't possibly get through. So what they do then is they deregulate and they make it so that, well, now if unless there is an active moving body of water in that place year round, not even seasonal, like a big drainage, if it's not there year round, then it doesn't count as a wetland anymore. So then he goes and he celebrates it. Well, this is great. Now the farmer can build his barn, the homeowners can build their home, right? Which should be the case. Like, I'm an architect, I understand that you shouldn't have to check with the federal government, necessarily for your house. But that also opens the door for the data centers and the nuclear power plants and whatever other large scale industry. Now they don't have that constraint as well. So we see that time and time again with the Republican messaging is it's this whole notion of we're for the common people, but they're really not. At the end of the day, they're doing these things because their big pocket donors are the ones who are reaping the biggest benefits. You can scale regulations. You could say, you know what, if you're under $1 million or $10 million, you could keep it big. Say under $10 million in your project, and you don't have to go through that federal review for wetland. Okay, but anything above that, like I said, we're talking nuclear power. If you're going to put that upstream of a massive river system that's going to drain in and affect millions of people's drinking water, we should know that ahead of
Yep.
time. But it's just that's I think been the big issue with Democrats is that we have kind of let them be out there saying this narrative and not saying what I'm saying here. Like, yes, I agree. The farmer should build his barn and he shouldn't have to worry about the federal government. However, we should all hopefully agree that the coal plant, maybe needs a little bit closer review. So,
Well, the case in point is over the past 12, 18 months, go back a year, one of the larger debates that was occurring in the run up to the 24 election was the debate on taxing capital gains, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or unrealized gains, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was clear. It was clearly stated in print by the attorneys, by the legislators that wrote the bills, that there were thresholds, that it was going to be, above a million at certain point and above 50 million another point. Like, it was ridiculous numbers in which it was really only going to affect 1 to 2% of the population. But this
Mm-hmm.
is where the Republicans are really good.
Mm-hmm.
They make their, 42% base feel as if they're all one percenters.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So how do you combat that? Because
Mm-hmm.
your district is far more, probably 99 point something more in the normal person category than it
Mm-hmm.
is the individuals that are being targeted as
Mm-hmm.
being as accumulating way too much. Bottom line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sort of my approach to that, because that's probably the most challenging question, is how do you break through and how do you connect with real people and then, and turn that into votes and support. And frankly, a lot of the concentration I've had has been on kind of what I would consider to be the fundamentals, of our country, be it the Constitution, a lot of people, regardless about free speech, and whether or not that's going to be infringed. And we see them taking talk show hosts off the air, whether it's the, search and seizure, habeas corpus, like you could be taken in with no warrant now. Whether or not the president can rewrite the Constitution with an executive order, because really, to me, it's if they're okay with it happening now, like they're going to have to realize by the time there's some sort of uber liberal, their worst fear, a Democrat is in the presidency, they're going to have all these powers too. So as I'm looking at this, and so much of what I'm doing is it's for my kids, it's for the future. It's for what does this look like when Donald Trump is not here anymore, and Chuck Grassley and Chuck Schumer and all of these, the older generations which are still in power are not here. Is this constant race to the bottom, what we want our politics to be about? So I focus quite a bit. I call it my 3 F's: family, freedom, and future. That's kind of the foundations of my messaging. And for me, families, obviously, I have my family. I got 4 kids. My oldest is 7 and my youngest is 2. Little kids. And I want to be able to look them in the eyes and show them, this is me doing something in the face of, I think, severe damage being done to our country. But family is also, it's that sense of community. It's what you're talking about too. We're out in rural places, but, we feel that sense of connection because we live there.
Right.
And our freedoms, like we said, the constitutional issues we're seeing cropping up all over the place. And then that future component, what do we want to do with this world that we are going to inherit no matter what? These people are only going to be there for the time that they are. So I'm trying really hard to focus on what do I want to do? Like we have to criticize what they're doing. And that is a huge part of all of this. But what does it look like when they're not here anymore? And what's the world that we want to be? How are we going to make that happen? And frankly, I think that the Republicans don't have much of that vision. So much of it is short-term gain at any cost. The culture wars, which they're really dependent on too. I mean, if we get it, and this is a whole other thing, if we get into some sort of large-scale global conflict, I think people are going to worry a little bit less about who's playing on the high school volleyball team. So that's the kind of thing that I see so much of the short-term gains the Republicans are trying to use. I'm trying very hard to make this about substance and actually connecting with people where they are.
Let me jump on that last thing that you pointed out, and I had you're alluding to trans in sports is what you're
Yes. Oh,
alluding
yes.
to.
Yes.
Let's put the mirror in front of the Democratic Party here and be honest with that particular topic. You just laid out a pretty compelling kind of narrative as it pertains to indirectly housing and jobs, and let's protect the farmer, let's protect the rural communities, let's expand our communities, give people more stability, all this other stuff. And yet in 24, the Big Tent party that was the Democratic Party, and a lot of the narrative that was coming out and the policy positions included a load of special interest items.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not belittling or diminishing any of them, but at the end of the day, elections are binary, as I stated earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you look back and you look at the postmortem, things such as trans in sports, are these things the Democrats should be talking about right now?
I think that these are things that that gets to that freedom aspect of my messaging. To me, when it comes up, I will unapologetically say I think that it is a waste of time and resources that we're using our legislatures, be it at the state or national level, in order to discriminate against what's really a very, very small group of people. Waste of political capital. And it's a waste of time because you're not doing things to make people's lives more affordable. We're not doing things to make housing more affordable or grid more like there's so many things, and just to your point, we're not belittling them. I don't necessarily think we have to lead with them though, because to me there are the kitchen table issues or the constitutional issues. We are at risk of losing our system of governance based on how overpowered the executive has become, how weak and ineffective Congress has become, and our Supreme Court is mostly complicit. So I'm trying to keep an eye on those big picture things. But if I have someone come up and ask me that question, I'll tell them I think that trans rights are human rights. Transgender healthcare is healthcare that they should be deserved, because in many cases it is life-saving healthcare. So I see it as like we should not be shying away from these issues. But that's not my whole identity either. This is all about, there's so many things with it. We can't make it just about one specific group of people. That's not going to win us an election. And as we can see, they're going to try and use those to divide. And meanwhile, our rights are being whittled away. And it's easy to get into office, apparently, with the division that's caused by transgender and the whole, conversation around that. But then we're seeing what they're doing with ICE and immigration. No knock. They don't even have to have a warrant. They can just no knock, just go into your house, detain you, and pull you out. It's the constitutional threats that we're all facing right now, in my mind, they do impact all transgender and all of us. So to
What
only
what
focus on these smaller issues doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I
what
won't shy away from them.
what are you hearing out on the? I'm not going to call it on the street. I'm going to call it out in the fields.
Sure.
When it
Yeah.
comes to that exact topic,
Yeah.
because historically, if you consider the kind of the historical narrative or the
Hmm.
descriptor that is like, if you were to define or describe a traditional Republican, would be fiscally conservative. They believe in freedom. They believe
Hmm.
in small government, right?
Hmm.
And we are
Hmm.
living in a real time kind of Rubicon here, in which
Hmm.
our government seems to be expanding, specifically government control at the top.
Hmm. Hmm.
Congress is not abiding by its own, or the other one is like they're the party of law and order.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of these things that you can point to, no knock
Hmm.
warrants, no knock warrants, no due process,
Hmm.
um, facial recognition scans
Yes.
everywhere,
Yes.
and it doesn't
Yes.
matter whether they'll do me, right?
Hmm. Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
so when you're out there, what are you hearing? Are you
Hmm.
hearing these traditional self-proclaimed Republicans who, if you
Hmm.
were to ask them, what does that mean? They would say, well, we spend less, small government, more freedoms, right? Those three
Hmm.
pillars.
Hmm. Hmm.
What are you hearing now? Are they self-aware with what is actually happening in the
Hmm.
bigger umbrella?
Oh yes. I mean, it's actually been quite surprising to me because I've kind of had that impression too. Like I'm going to go out and talk with a Democrat group, in Lynn County or wherever, and then I would expect that it would be very much, the kind of conversations you would have in Democratic political circles. But they're worried about the fact that, most of them are in agriculture. A lot of them are, or related to it. And when the president is imposing tariffs and making the business environment so unstable that their inputs are wildly fluctuating. Equipment costs are out of control. They can't fix their own stuff. I mean, these are the kind of things they're worried about. They're not worried about who's on the high school volleyball team. I've had one question. I've done dozens of events now. I don't even know how many people I've talked to. One question this entire time on transgender people participating in sports. I think that it is. I hear more on that topic or those culture war topics from the people who are trying to divide us, being the Republicans, than anyone else. And another great example too is they talk about undocumented people voting in the elections, right? And that's a big push for the Republicans too, is they are doing this thing called the Save Act. I don't know if you've seen
Oh
it.
yeah.
Yeah, and so if you have changed your name, you're going to have to provide additional documentation, assuming you can get it. It's a poll tax, which disenfranchises people. And they say, you know what, we're going to make it so that undocumented people aren't able to vote. Well, guess what? They already can't. It's already been illegal since the 1990s under, by the way, a Democratic president. So as I'm talking with people, these culture war things, like I said, I won't shy away from them when they do come up, but they're not. People are worried about the fact that they have a multi-generational farm and their kids don't want to stay there. They don't see the opportunity and they're leaving, and so that corporate consolidation is continuing to occur.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that's what people are most worried about. And here's another, this is an interesting one, and I've looked at this one quite a bit. 90% of family pig farms in the last 30 years have closed. 90%. That's because of the rise of Smithfield. It's hedge funds that come in and they pump New York
Well,
money and all this funds in, and it shuts down the mom and pop and family competition.
let's
Boss
be
old boss. Now that's owned by China.
yeah, that's what I
So
was going to say. Let's name names
yes.
because the individual that was in charge of writing that legislation is
Mhm.
our current senator, Eric
Mhm.
Schmidt. He was
That's the issue. Yes. Yes.
and they hate China except if they're buying our land.
Yes.
How
That's the thing.
so my question is,
Yes.
you and I know that.
Hmm.
You're not a farmer. I'm
Hmm.
clearly not a farmer. I would like to be a farmer one day. I don't know, maybe
Sounds
just to be
nice in
left
some
alone,
ways.
right?
Yeah.
But if we know that, there's 0% chance that your constituents that are farmers or farm family members or farmer neighbors don't know that reality. Why is it not resonating? Why is it their hatred for pronouns and woke and everything else that's
Hmm.
superseding their common sense and ignoring the reality that it was their party in this state that enacted the laws that are in
Hmm.
essence decapitating them to the
Hmm.
benefit of China?
I think that in I think that when I talk with people, and that's sort of that otherness, right, where it feels like, is this someone who will kind of relate in what I'm saying? We're talking about these bigger picture issues, whether it's, your kitchen table economics and things like that. I think that the Democrats have done such a poor job of getting out and talking to people and understanding where they are that we have fallen into that trap as well. We think that's how they are. We think that, oh, these people are going to be too worried about pronouns, well, they're really not. And if we had shown up, maybe even in 24, and made more of a concerted effort to realize that, and not just focus on these specific issues, we might have been able to not miss the forest because the trees right in front of us. I mean, like I said, these issues, these topics, they do come up, but it's rare. I mean, it, I joke, sometimes like my wife and I will, when we wake up, we'll have a cup of coffee and kind of catch some of the clip shows, Kimmel or Colbert or something, in the morning on YouTube. And we joke about it. It's like I wouldn't know anything about what Mike Lindell, that pillow salesman, ever said if he wasn't on Jimmy Kimmel all the time, because they're critiquing them. So I think we've kind of become our own worst enemies of our perception of the otherness of people who are really, I mean, they're an hour away down the road. They're not that far, and an hour away is, we have the same weather. Our schools are very similar, like we have very same house prices and all that. There's so much more, the same concerns about the cost of living and childcare access and the quality of our schools, our public schools, which, by the way, they're taking our public money and putting these private religious schools. I just don't think a lot of people realize in rural areas that direct connection, just like what you're saying, with Republican policies are equaling the death and destruction of our family built operations purely at the cost for the largest corporations
So
and the billionaires.
let me ask specifically to your district, and if you've seen it
Mhm.
on the ground along exactly those lines. And this is a combination of a federal issue, but it's really being driven here in Missouri through Jeff City and Kehoe and the Republican supermajority, and that is the explosion of school districts that are now on 4-day
Mhm.
school weeks. They
Mhm.
claim that it's well, our research shows that it's more efficient and more family time
Mhm.
and all this other stuff. But that call bullshit where bullshit is due. It's
Mhm.
funding. It is
Mhm.
funding.
Mhm. Oh,
A-
yes.
and I want to hear what you know or what you're seeing, because when I
Mhm.
think of a 4-day school week,
Mhm.
I don't think about the test scores. I think about that family that's struggling, that maybe has two income parents or a single parent who has two
Hmm.
jobs. What are they doing on that fifth day with their kids now?
Oh yeah.
How is that resonating?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting one. So as I've been, going around, that's kind of been a talking point that I've had with people because the majority of the schools, out in my district have that 4-day week, right? It's where things are moving. But it's interesting too, I was up in Plattsburgh and I was talking with some people and there was a guy who, these are Democrats, in a Democrat meeting. And there was a guy who was on the school board, and he was saying that when they were looking to put in the 4-day a week policy, there's a ton of pushback. People did not like it. Exactly the reasons that you're saying. If you're working 5 days a week, what are you going to do with your elementary schooler, especially if both parents need that income? What are you going to do on that fifth day? And the interesting thing is that he was saying that they actually kind of liked it when they hit 4-day weeks because they found that there was a lot of pushback to get there in the first place, but once they were there and people kind of got used to it, now it's, well, I can schedule my doctor's appointments on Fridays or, kind of get more in a routine with that 4-day week. So possibly, right? However, that doesn't, regardless of whether or not you can find that there's enough funding
Yeah.
saving, to make that viable, what I'm seeing with the schools too that are concerning a lot of people is it's not just the fact that 4 or 5 days a week. North Davies had a school where the gym roof collapsed just a couple of months ago on a Saturday during the school year. So we're not just ignoring the children in the sense of not giving them 5 days a week of school. We're not even keeping a literal roof over their head in the buildings they're legally required to go to.
Yeah, I think when I hear those anecdotal success stories of, oh, well, we can use Fridays
Mm,
to go to the doctor and the
mm.
dentist and everything else, it's like, well, what about the fucking people that don't have health insurance or dental
Oh, I
insurance and they
know.
have, right?
I know.
It's the reality is the spectrum of the narrative is
Hmm.
so vast.
Hmm.
And this is where I'll give the Republicans credit. They find a way to take that cherry rose blossom, right, and say, "Oh,
Hmm.
look how good this is working for this family." Case in
Hmm.
point, school vouchers, right? Freedom of choice, school freedom.
Hmm.
Statistic after statistic from state after state proves well over 90% of the money that is utilized through voucher systems are from kids that are already in the private school system,
Hmm.
and oh, by the way, having had a kid that went through SLU High, a
Hmm.
private school here, guess what happens to tuitions?
Yeah.
You know,
Up, right? We got unlimited money now, right? Yeah.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay, here
Yeah.
comes this $5,000 credit. Well, guess what? My
Mhm.
tuition just went up $49.99.
Right. Yes.
It's this this
Funny how
this
that
is
works.
not
Yeah.
this is not funny
Yeah.
math. All right,
Yes. Yes.
let's get to your platform.
Hmm.
Like I said, I
I
didn't.
wanted to, can I touch really briefly too, just for a second, because I think this is
Yeah.
a really important one too, on the whole private school public funding
Hmm.
topic. I don't know if you've heard and you're familiar with the Herzog Foundation out of St. Joseph. When you're looking, and I always tell people, it's like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist type guy myself. I really like to dig into the facts. Of course, there are some that, no, that's kind of questionable, right? But I start connecting these dots and it feels like I get my tinfoil hat on. But you look at the Herzog Foundation and you look at the money that they put into the politicians who are then redirecting our public funding into these private religious schools. The chair of the Herzog Foundation is Todd Graves, Sam Graves' brother.
Yeah.
And the cycle of money between these politicians, it is not difficult to draw a very short line between them. Campaign contributions, and then what do you know? All this money is going directly into these people's pockets with their organizations. So that's something that is really bothering a lot of people too. But I just want to at least make that point with the public funding and the private religious schools.
Okay. Let me jump to a potential finish line just real quickly. I'm going to
Mhm.
interject a question I wasn't planning on asking, but along these lines, because what you're describing is corruption, full blown
Mhm.
corruption.
Mhm.
Traditional Republicans say they hate big government because it's corrupt. Well, that is
Mhm.
corruption. Corruption occurs on the left as well, all over the board. Would
Mhm.
you, if you were to win the Missouri 6th seat, would you support, write, vote yes on banning stock trade, banning lobbyist contributions, banning lobby jobs post? Would you take a
Yes.
stand on those areas to eliminate financial corruption, at least at the top end, from federal government?
Yes, 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 and yes. I mean, absolutely. We've seen it so many times too. Like, when COVID was happening, and there's the meeting of the senators, and they come out and they start offloading stocks because the news comes out in the next day, and the stocks tank. Should be, and it's shocking that it's not illegal. It should be. But there's also the soft corruption too that we see. So Sam Graves, up in Tarkio, there's a little airport up there. It's owned by the city, completely surrounded by his family farmland that he owns. He's the chair of the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. He's gotten millions of dollars that have gone into improvements at that little airport. Hardly anybody uses that airport.
Yeah, I was
But
gonna.
what do you know? That's where he stores his private plane collection. And what do you know? In the big, beautiful bill, he made sure they included a provision that you can completely deduct the cost of
Well,
your private planes with from your taxes.
so
So
let me ask you this then. Given an environment, a landscape in which social media is about the lowest common denominator and the biggest banner and billboard,
Mhm, mhm,
you knowing these things, do you have a strategy to both be pragmatic?
mhm,
Here's how I feel about agricultural policy. These are things I believe in. These are things I'm going to fight in. And oh, by the way, this mofo over here, this
mhm,
private jet deduction. Here's how many
mhm.
jets he has. Here's pictures of his airfield, and here's his land around it. How does that make
Oh
you
yes.
feel? Right?
Oh yes.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so that's been one of the fun parts for this for me. So as I've been going around, I've talked with so many people. I have upwards of a dozen now who have, we've had conversations. I'll get coffee, we'll have a phone call, and these are people all across the state who are experts in a variety of topics, including people who live in the Tarkio area, Northwest Missouri, who maybe have been around him or know him or familiar with the area. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying not to go about this in a way, I would say a very Republican way, which is kind of shoot first, fact check later, right? And just purely appealing to emotion. I want to be able to say, hey, he's getting millions of dollars of public money funneled to his little airport. And I find that highly questionable. So let's go to the Missouri Department of Transportation, MoDOT, which I've done, and do a sunshine request because he's getting public money for this. So let's get the documentation, and see how they're spending it. So we're doing the research, and I've got these people that I've gathered from across the state, and I'm calling it kind of like a research committee where we're going to start meeting monthly, and we're going to talk. It's not just opposition research.
Yeah.
It's where are hospitals distributed and how long does it take to get there? How are the schools doing? How's the infrastructure across the whole broad variety? Like, I want to treat this like a real thing. Like, I want to have plans for how are we going to fix, this highway? How are we going to make sure the Scotland County Medical Center has funding and doesn't close, which I'm going there next week, things like that. So I am really trying to ground this as much as possible in reality, and research with people who are there on the ground. I think that's key.
So, I mean, they've been masters at the ready, fire, aim methodology in which you're describing. I personally, and this is just a 2-second soapbox, I think the Democrats should be doing it all the time. I think you should do the exact
Mm-hmm.
same thing. Hey, Sam
Mm-hmm.
Graves, prove to me that this airport is not corrupt. Because here's
Mm-hmm.
what we think.
Right.
Because that's how the American public is being trained to consume quote
Yes, that is
news,
true.
right?
That is very true.
And
Yes.
and I think in the world of political strategy, and this is again where I think Democrats fall well short.
Mm-hmm.
When we think the high road is the best road all the
Mm-hmm.
time, and we
Yeah.
continue to lose elections, is
Mm-hmm.
it? You know,
Right. No, I completely agree. I've had that talk with a lot of people too. I love Michelle Obama. I think she's great. The whole when they go low, we go high has killed so much dialogue because people
yeah.
say, people think the high road is being silent or not saying what they need to say about it. So I am definitely hoping to change that with my approach to this. I think being direct is going to be
Yeah.
the way to do it. I still want to have it's for me, right? I want to go back. I want to be ethical. I want to understand the issues in their real sense, but I completely agree too in that, we're going to land some haymakers on this guy. And I think he's going to have to defend himself and answer some questions about what he has not been doing for North Missouri since 2001 when he
Yeah.
went to the House.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about your platform. You
Mhm.
have basically 5 pillars that you feature on the homepage. For those of you interested, really easy, Josh. Me, I'll have a link to it in the show notes here. 10,000 foot view, real quick. Agriculture and rural communities is number 1. Then you have healthcare and Medicaid. followed by the environment, economic development, and then rural broadband as the fifth.
hmm
Let's start with number one because your district is it's farmland, right?
hmm hmm
It's one of those districts that Republicans love to show that it's all red. Look how many people we have. Well, hold on.
Yeah.
Land doesn't vote, but the
Right.
farmland.
Yes.
Um, give me your quick stump speech. 2-story building elevator pitch on
hmm
agriculture focus. When you think of agricultural policy and what you would do as a potential representative, what are you focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that what we need to be able to focus on a bit is diversifying the rural economy a bit. So as everyone is probably assuming, the majority of the rural economy is dominated with agriculture. There are quite a bit other, there's other aspects of it that are out there, but that goes back to that population. Looking at the 50s and 60s, it's a fraction today than it was then. So where I see room for improvement is going to be how do we help people live in these rural places, whether it's staying there, starting to work on the brain drain where people are leaving. How do we get them to actually stay put? And a lot of that is going to be kind of those bread and butter issues: good schools, good jobs, access to healthcare. And all of those things then feed into a healthier rural economy. But you're not going to move out to the middle of Scotland County if the nearest drive to a maternity center, if you want to start your family, is over an hour away.
So,
And
so
that's the case in a lot of places.
So let's stick to the agriculture portion of that
hmm
specifically because
hmm
I agree with you.
Yes,
I think
yes,
I think
yes,
it's a big picture.
yes.
But when it comes to agriculture and farmers in particular,
hmm
because what's going on there is you got rings of the Kevin Bacon theory, right? You have the farmer, but then you have the
hmm
farmer's family, and then you have the farmer's kids and neighbors, et cetera. So there's
hmm
a compounding effect there. Tariffs, come Liberation Day back in April, whenever Trump decided he was going to blow up the world order of trade,
Yes.
specifically when it came to agricultural products,
hmm
um,
hmm
the U.S. farmer, for the most part, ground to a halt.
hmm
Issues with not only labor, due to immigrants that were fearing and fleeing and otherwise, but when it came to the economics of the product,
hmm
we lost markets. We, being farmers, lost their markets.
Yes.
What? How are you communicating through that now? Here we are, 8 months later. It's not really gotten any better. There's
hmm
been these bailouts, which is code for social welfare for
Yeah.
corporations.
Yes.
What
Yes.
does that narrative look like, and how would you address that for
Yes.
your farmers?
Absolutely. Yeah, so and part of diversifying that rural economy, with agricultural is going to be if you look at the Farm Bill and kind of how our nation's agricultural economy is structured, which so much of that goes through the Farm Bill, it's based on subsidies. So, your row crops, your soybeans, your corn, which, when you're looking at those two products in particular, so much of the soybean growth in America is geared towards the export market. This isn't food we're eating here domestically. It's all being shipped abroad. And as you're alluding to, when you have a destabilizing presence in the White House that's going to shut down the market to China, which, by the way, takes decades, generations to build. And once it goes away, it doesn't come back very quickly. When we need to basically restructure how we incentivize people to grow. If we're going to be geared towards the export market, but the export market is going to be fragile, or we're going to be geared towards, in the case of corn, biofuels, and ethanol, things like that. Again, things we aren't eating. In my opinion, we could, and this is coming through conversations with people, we need to work on kind of diversifying what we're growing in America, foods we can eat domestically. And part of that is going to be, they cut SNAP benefits, which, food for people who need it. And where does that food come from? It comes from American farmers. And where does that money then go from the federal government to the American farmers into our rural communities? So, if we had a better and more stable way of feeding people domestically, and I think a lot of that's going to be expansion of SNAP. I don't think hungry people in the wealthiest country in the world is the right answer. And we can also look at things like feeding kids in schools using what we have. We have the best farmland in the world, right? We can produce more with what we have than nearly anybody else at a higher quality. So we should be using those amazing tools to not just feed people here, but also it's
Do
more environmentally sustainability. Cover crops, things that are not just going to continue to wreck the environment. The pesticides, that's another big concern that people have. Iowa has some of the highest cancer rates in the entire country. And a lot of that comes from the pesticides. We have rivers that flow into North Missouri from Iowa. And people, I was talking with somebody about that in Unionville just a few weeks ago. They're concerned about the cancer clusters and things like that. So it's
yes,
all related
if
in that way.
it's a Julia Roberts movie, is what it is, man.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So
It is.
how do
Yes.
you though how do you tackle
Hmm.
the hypocrisy and the flywheel wheel reality of so for example, if you look at our soy crop in particular, that it's a low grade soy, and that's
Hmm.
why we're exporting it to China and other countries, right? So we're creating a really low end product that isn't up to snuff for what our food quality expectations are, right? So we're shipping it overseas, and then you go over there, and what they're doing is they're producing super low grade products like t-shirts, socks, whatever, and it's
Hmm.
all coming back over here. But
Hmm.
when it comes to food, when you take the irony of that low grade product trade off, right, that export
Hmm.
relationship, when you talk about food though, if we were to farm and produce and keep domestic inventory of higher grade product, higher nutritional value, etc., here's what the economy, here's what I'm hearing, that is more expensive food, right? So now we're looking at the potential of an inflationary pressure,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Maybe. I think
because
it's how you go about it. Yeah.
as an early market for based on my wife's mandates,
Hmm.
we were an organic fridge starting in like 2002,
Hmm.
so
Hmm. Hmm.
that's what happens. So and
Yeah.
I get that it can scale and it can become cost effective. It can become affordable, really.
Hmm.
But how do you, again, I'm going to talk about the constituent, your
Hmm.
farmers.
Hmm. Hmm.
Where's their head in that process? Like, what are they
Hmm.
hearing? Because I can tell you this: Sam Graves and the Republicans across the country that govern over these districts are not kicking out good ideas. They're kicking out
Hmm.
no ideas.
Hmm.
So what is that relate? That what's that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, and I get what you're saying as far as, whether or not if we're going to have more specialty products, are they going to be more expensive, and potentially be inflationary. But what I'm seeing and kind of the trends are, agriculture overall, and it really has been for generations now, is entirely geared towards more acreage, bigger equipment, more growth, more, right? And that leads in that corporate consolidation. But what's happening then, and I think people are really starting to realize it, is we're shutting out an entire new generation of young farmers and young people too, who are able to then not just get into the field, get into it and continue it, but also then continue that the tradition of the proud agricultural tradition that we had, right? And one thing that I'm seeing that is fairly successful in this area, there's one called the Fun Farm, just north of Liberty, where it's like a pumpkin patch, right? It's under 100 acres, but they've got they specialize in pumpkins, and so they're very seasonal, but they're able to be economically viable by not just planting row crops. It's going to have to be something that people who want to have like a specialty dairy and then be able to sell locally, or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to basically rethink how we incentivize people economically, starting with the government, to make it so that those smaller scale localized options, which gives you healthier local food, which we all sound like we want, right, is a viable option instead of just purely continuing to kick money. Most of the subsidies go to the largest producers. So I think it's just it's kind of what we see in every corner of the economy, where
Yep.
the benefits that are trying to incentivize, whatever growth is purely going to the largest producers. So I was introduced to a term by the Democratic Party in St. Louis when I went to a meeting out there last summer. Is bubble up economics. The idea of trying to, rather than trickle down, we've been waiting for that trickle for a long time. But like focusing on the smaller scale operations, the family operations with the incentives rather than the largest corporate consolidated operations. So, and there's still a lot, there's so much that I have to learn
Yeah,
about it too,
yeah.
right?
It's that terminology just drives me fucking nuts. And this is an explicit pod, by the way,
No,
because
that sounds good.
when you look at two worlds,
Hmm.
education and corporate America, right? In the
Hmm.
educational world, when you have individuals, students that are struggling, what do? Right? We create these IEPs and we spend a lot of money in our public schools and our private schools to basically help those that are at the bottom, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We know it. It's institutionally part of the process.
Hmm.
Go to Wall Street. You go to any company that is publicly traded or private, I don't care. The amount of money that's spent on training, on helping employees, and putting them on individual performance plans and et cetera. Like, this is part of our process mentally when it comes to our private markets in corporate America, as well as our public market in school districts. We're used to helping those that are at the bottom become better. But there's a disconnect when it comes to
Hmm.
politics. We don't view those people as investable, right?
Right, right. Yes, that's true. We tend to just go for
Right.
the big ticket operations. Correct. Yes,
Uh,
it's completely coming at the cost of all the small. I mean,
which
you know.
which brings me to item number 2 that's on your
Mhm.
page.
Mhm.
Which, if you have, I don't know the number of farmers you have in your district, but I do know, without checking the numbers, that the amount of
Mhm.
people that are at poverty level or below who are on Medicaid, no insurance, or the ACA is
Mhm.
probably, because the poverty level is 11%, roughly 10.5, 11% in Missouri 6. So if we
Mhm.
take just 10% of the population, that's 78,000 people that
Mhm.
are at poverty or below. You have to assume their healthcare is shit. You've got
Mhm.
healthcare as the number 2 item on your page. Take a
Mhm.
second and, again, give us that little stump. How do you view it? What's going on? What are you hearing on the ground? What would be the first course of action for you as a rep in the district?
Yeah, absolutely. So healthcare access, and it's not just, the insurance, and the markets, but it's the physical infrastructure, the buildings, whether or not there's a hospital in their town. It's a humongous issue. I was in Mexico, Missouri, a few months ago, and they've got the Audrain County Medical Center, which is closed down. It's currently abandoned. And I got a chance to sort of visit that and see what it looks like. And I'm trying to, this is a show me state. So I'm trying to, show people too, like we're talking about these Republican policies that are harming healthcare in rural communities. So this is an example of what it looks like, when the hospital does die in town. And I have people reach out to me after that and they talk about how, I had a lady who was telling me that, her dad lived a few blocks away from the hospital after it shut down. He had a heart attack, and the nearest ambulatory facility was in Columbia. It's a 45-minute drive. So they worked on him, basically on his front lawn, and he did not make it. So it's like, whether or not he would have made it if the hospital would have been there, you can't say. But this lady reached out to me and told me that because she wanted to let me know the story of her father, and also to let me know she was getting ready to move to Columbia because that's where the healthcare access is.
Yeah.
So I think what we really have to point out and show, which I'm really looking to do by just going there and seeing it and talking to these people, is when the hospital dies in town, a lot of times the town dies because it's jobs, but it also is security for families who want to make sure that, if my kid has an issue, I can take them to the emergency room,
Yep.
or I'm aging in town, and I need to have specialist care. We don't have that right now, and it is dying. And when they make the cuts to Medicaid and the big beautiful bill, I mean, it completely decimates the funding for these rural hospitals who, just like you're saying, when you have a higher percentage of your population that's dependent on Medicaid dollars, now that money's gone, these hospitals are operating on very thin margins, so they go away. in my opinion, I think that we need to move in America towards that universal health care where you know that your hospital in your town is going to be there because it has the funding to stay that way. And I understand there is a cost with that, but I think we need to tax the capitalists in our system to help pay for that. And I don't think that we need to be continuing to give trillions of dollars of tax breaks to people when I'm seeing, I mean, hopefully we can all agree, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, in our rural America, we love these towns, the historic downtowns, they have this quaint Americana feeling to them, you hardly get anywhere else. And a lot of that is tied to things like, your healthcare and your schools. So to me, I see that, not to be too literal with the analogy, but the hospital is in a lot of ways the beating heart,
Yeah.
of what helps keep these towns alive. So, and part of what I'm looking at with it too is, not just whether or not they have it, but how close are they? My wife, she grew up in Oklahoma. My father-in-law is a cattle rancher down there, and his parents, my wife's grandparents, they passed away a few years ago, but they were in a similar situation, which a lot of people find themselves in rural America, where they had a medical emergency, a stroke, right? You need to be able to get to medical care quickly, and it was an hour drive at
Yep.
100 miles an hour, right? So we're putting people in positions where it's really, it's no surprise in a lot of ways that the populations are declining. But I think that there's multiple ways we can look at it. It's not just building a new hospital in every town. I've seen some really interesting ideas for things called standalone emergency rooms that they're building in North Carolina, where, instead of having all the beds in the massive facility, you've got ambulatory. You can help if someone's going through labor, if someone was in a horrific car accident or they're having a heart attack, you can't get that treatment at the urgent care. I hear that too. I've heard
Right.
people who say, well, our hospital's closed, but we got an urgent care. The urgent cares are great, right? But it says right on their website and everywhere, like if you're having a heart attack or a real emergency, not the place to go,
Yeah.
So I see it. There's opportunities, I think, to sort of look at these rural places and rural America and find ways to solve the problem where we can do either hub and spoke, where you have centralized care with vehicles and ways to get out to
We're,
rural
and
places.
and
But
we already have the model built. It's called the U.S.
mhm.
military. That is exactly what
Yes,
military
yes,
healthcare is around the world.
yes, yes, exactly.
So I'm going to skip environment because I think we've kind of touched on that through
Sure.
the agriculture, et cetera. I'm really
Mhm.
most interested in the economic development because at the end of the day, numbers matter. And if you can't pay your
Mhm.
bills, if there's no jobs, if there's no new houses, et cetera,
Mhm.
none of it matters. So
Yes.
when you think of economic development within Missouri 6, given that you do kind of have this bifurcation between your more densely populated 3+ counties, and then there are the other 30 that we've been addressing primarily through
Mhm.
agriculture and rural needs. What does
Mhm.
economic development look like for you? In, maybe a 2 or a 3 point plan. What is a successful strategy?
Yeah, sure. I think that successful, because I like asking people this question too, kind of what do you see the sixth district looking like in 10 years, right? And to me, a successful strategy is obviously high paying jobs out in rural places would be fantastic, but I think part of that is restructuring the farm bill to more to give more incentives and help to people who are just trying to get started or smaller scale operations. I think that we need to crack down, and we see this in every facet of the economy, but cracking down on what we're seeing is a monopolistic behavior with a lot of every industry. But let's say farm equipment as an example. A lot of combines that like John Deere's making, these massive machines, are $1 million each. And if you want to repair it, right to repair, you cannot. So we've got these roadblocks set up. And what I mean by that too is, like I said, my father-in-law is a cattle rancher. I've asked him, if you could get a John Deere from the 90s or if you could get a John Deere from today, what would you go for? 90s was he didn't even hardly let me finish the question. And a lot of that is the fact that you can actually fix your
Yeah.
own, it's the ability to be self-reliant. I mean,
I,
we're
I, I
so
I have a 67 Mustang. I know exactly what he's
Oh,
saying.
nice. Yeah,
So,
pre-computer. Yeah. I mean, I have an 88 F-150. I love working on it too, and
yeah.
it's to me, that's what, that's freedom. I mean, that's the ability to be self-sufficient and not feel like, Like right now, the products that are available, if you want to buy equipment, to that small to mid-sized range, basically doesn't exist. And if
Mhm.
you've got that $1 million combine, you are at the mercy of John Deere or whoever to both diagnose the issue and then fix it. And so if you're talking like week after week after week on these things that you depend on for, if it's harvest season, you're losing tens of thousands, weekly. So to me, so much of every aspect of our economy is geared towards the largest operators, growth at any cost, corporate consolidation. There are 4 meatpacking companies, pretty much nationwide, but focusing on North Missouri, there's 4 meatpacking companies. So if you're even a smaller scale cattle ranch, you don't have the ability to negotiate prices. You don't, they like to blame. Well, right now we have a something like a 70-year low on the size of the cattle herd nationwide. But and the cost is going up, but that's not increased money that the ranches are seeing. That money is going towards the meat packers and how USDA is set up with the large scale facilities.
Right.
So to me, it's about breaking down some of those monopolies, increasing competition, allowing people to have more options for selling their products locally too, and not just feeding into the large scale machine, which is kind of how everything is set up on every aspect of the economy. So, there's a lot there, but I think a lot of it is sort of breaking apart sort of the large scale corporate interests that we have. And we see
It's
that
so funny.
everywhere.
The messaging is really small government. We need smaller government.
It is
You
funny,
sound
isn't it?
like a
Yeah.
Republican, Josh.
Well, I'm not. I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
okay, so
No,
I want to shift.
the funny thing is too is just on that, I think it is such a Democrat thing. Like they say they're small government, but I'll give you even a funny one. So Sam Graves has a primary as well, and he's got a guy who's running in it. And I read a bio he listed, and he said he had 3 political heroes: Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, very expected for Republicans, right? And FDR. It's like, you guys know he was a Democrat, right? But then
Right.
when I think that's the thing, it's like the FDR Democrats, the working class Democrats. We were greatest when we were taxing the wealthy at those high percentages. That's
Yeah,
when we built the middle
I
class.
recently wrote a Substack post under "Tell Me You're Joking," so shameless plug there, talking about dissecting, defining when America was great, and my
Mm-hmm.
theory basically fell on the post World War II up through early '60s, the reality of the growth of the middle class, right? Unions,
Mm-hmm.
jobs, benefits, houses, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the correlating factor there was 2 things. One, the reality that the corporate class, the richest, were taxed at a rate of in excess of 90% on their top dollars. One, so we were funding everything. And number
Mm-hmm.
2, there was this faux ego stemming from the fathers and the elders that literally fought the big war and won, and they felt big, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
glory days. They're wearing
Yeah.
their Letterman's jackets, and talking about all the state titles, right? So
Mm-hmm.
when you
Mm-hmm.
combine those 2 things, like, and our current leadership, they were kids and teenagers growing up at a time in which those things were a reality. So they
Mm-hmm.
heard the braggadociousness of their elders, but they also experienced all the benefits of a tax system that was making sure that they had all of their infrastructure provided,
Mm-hmm. And
right?
then they kind of pulled the ladder up behind them on the way
So
up.
So I want
Yeah.
to cross over one last subject regarding
Mm-hmm.
Missouri, and this is a little bit of a state issue. But if you were to achieve success in the race, it would be a big issue for your constituents, and that is Kehoe's attempt to focus on removing the state income tax. Again, the
Mm-hmm.
econ nerd in me, I've been looking at this, studying other states such as Texas, Florida in particular, even Tennessee, that have gone through this same process in eliminating their state income tax.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans nationally will say that's why there's this huge flood of people there. And to a degree, that's true for some, but the reason why it's somewhat successful, and you could argue that it's not, especially in Florida. Florida's in extreme financial trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But Texas has ungodly amounts of oil. Florida has ungodly amounts of beaches and tourism destinations. Tennessee, to a degree, has Nashville as an incredible hub of generating outsider tax dollars, sales
Mhm.
tax, use tax, etc. Missouri does not have Disney.
Mhm. Yeah.
Missouri does not have, black gold. It
Mhm.
has beautiful parks, streams, rivers, etc. But Missouri has an identity issue that we are an out exporter of population.
Mhm.
So if they were to pull this off, sales taxes are going to skyrocket. That
Mhm.
has been historically proven to affect those on the lower end of the spectrum at a far greater rate than others.
Absolutely.
What's your thoughts on the potential and the effects that it would have on Missouri 6?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's gonna be really bad, quite frankly. And I was just talking about we were talking just earlier about, someone who drive down to Chillicothe for that 5 cents cheaper gas. So if we're going to start using the localized sales tax to pay for everything, which is what they want to do, then, well, now you're actually taking your sales tax money out of your county when you're going to the next one over for the cheap gas station, right? So to your point, I see the implications for this are vast and largely negative. I don't really see the whole. I think Republicans are so much better at marketing a policy and talking like we're going to cut your taxes. Oh, that
Thousand
sounds
percent.
great. We want that. But exactly to your point, it is going to really hit the people with the lowest amount of money the hardest. It's just like the tariffs. It's a consumption tax. So if I'm only making $30,000 a year, the vast majority of that is going to go towards consumables, food, housing, things I need, right? Consumables. If you're making $1 million a year and you're spending the same amount of money, all of that money that you didn't have to spend and get taxed, is money in your pocket. Same deal with tariffs. So to me, I mean, I've been hearing worries already about how are they going to fund local fire departments? How are they going to fund local police? They don't understand the implications of what exactly this is going to mean. And how could they? Because they aren't going to be able to chart everyone's behaviors, where they're going to actually be spending their money. But I think this is the perfect example of a policy for the Republicans, which they can say is such a great thing for everybody, but if they manage to squeeze it through, we are going to see the negative repercussions of this for decades,
Well,
generations,
we have
right?
we have 46 years of proof that trickle down economics under Reagan and beyond has empirically not worked. We
It
have
doesn't work.
the largest gap in CEO to worker pay that we've ever had
Mhm.
in our nation's history.
Mhm.
We have poverty rates that are ridiculous. We have affordability issues across the board, median households.
Mhm.
I mean, your district is benefiting, frankly, from being expansively rural and
Mhm.
underperforming. I mean,
Mhm.
this is a Missouri trait. Jason Smith
Yes.
down in Missouri 8,
Mhm.
it blows my mind that he is the chair of that committee, coming
Mhm.
from a district that is financially insolvent, that is a
Mhm.
failure for decades,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and there's a disconnect.
Yes. There is. There really is. And I don't think I think what we need to do as we're talking about too is just ask, I mean, do you like 25 or 30% sales tax? Because that's what it's going to be. I mean, there's already areas that have fairly high sales tax as it is, and so
Yeah.
you start having to stack that much more to make up for these huge deficits. I mean, they're trying to blow, hundreds of millions of dollars of a deficit hole in the state budget. To me, the thing is, and I think that kind of goes towards kind of my approach with all this, with politics as well. If they're going to tear something down, or they're going to try and put through what I think is a horrific policy, like what we're talking about, where they want to have these massive increase in sales tax. I think that we have a real opportunity to refocus kind of how our taxation system works and
100%.
tax the capitalist. I like capitalism. I think capitalism is what gives us innovation. I think there's a lot of that's the reason why America has been able to excel and innovate the way that we have. However, it has to be regulated because, as we can see, gluttony is a real problem. And to me, it almost makes too much sense to say, all right, this is a capitalist system. Let's tax the capitalists. Let's talk about capital gains, and talk about people who, oh, I don't take a salary, I have a $1 a year,
Carry
but you
forward.
made right, and you made $100 million in equity in your stocks
Yeah.
that you're never going to have to pay money on. But meanwhile, like I would rather have that conversation about property taxes, right? Talk about being taxed on unrealized capital gains. We deal with that all the time as we the people. So I think you guys can probably deal with it on Wall Street or wherever else, So I think that's kind of the direction at least my mind is going with, to me, I'm hopeful that we can stop the policy from going in. I think it's a horrific idea. But if they're going to go through with it, we're going to have a problem no matter what, where we're going to have to make up some money. So I think we get creative and kind of say, all right, let's go for these hedge funds. Let's go for where the capital is in our capitalist system, and we can all benefit.
Last question. Let's talk about the big tent issue of the day. It's funny because the Republican pundits on television, Fox in particular, love saying the polling on Democratic parties it's 12% or whatever. And here's the reality of the situation. The reason why the Democratic Party generically polls low, and that includes Democrats are saying, yeah, no, I'm not happy, is because there's no stated leader. So my question, because
Yes.
once you put a name at the top of this is the leader of the party, you will see 20, 30 points immediately overnight go up because everybody's like, okay, at least we know who we are, right? There's
Right.
that. So my question to you is, and we got a lot of options, a lot of strategies that could be laid out here. Who do you like? Who do you like as a potential 28, coming out of 26, leading up to 28? Who do you like at the top of the ticket nationally that you think has not only the best chance of winning, because again, I'm a binary realist here, but is kind of expressing some combination of the things that you feel not only value your district, but America as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. I couldn't agree more. I feel like that's kind of the issue the Democrats have is our lack of identity. We have a bit of an identity crisis. I really like the success that I've been seeing from Governor Andy Beshear. He's managed to be, fairly successful as a Democratic governor in a red state. And I think that would appeal to a lot of people. I also admire what Gavin Newsom has been doing. There's a little bit of me that kind of says, I'm glad to see people punching back against Trump and the Trumpism, the AI memes and things like that. It's nice to see in some ways because we could use a little bit of pick me up, in light of so much of what Trump pushes out. But he's more of a California elite. So to me, that's why I like the idea of someone coming from the middle of the country. I think that Governor Gretchen Whitmer would also be a fantastic candidate. So what I'm hoping for more than anything with the process of getting to our next nominee as a Democratic Party will be a healthy primary process. That's what killed us in 2024.
Yeah.
We did not have, because, I got my opinion, you might have yours, of what we think will be successful, but really it's we the people that have to weigh in. And when we don't have the opportunity to do that, that's why we find ourselves in this situation. And I have to say too, I think it's worth mentioning, the Democratic Party, President Obama, he was the first president I was able to vote for when I turned 18 in 2008. I loved President Obama, and I think he was able to obviously usher in an era of diversity, which the Democratic Party and the country would really benefit from. And I'm fully aware too, I'm talking about Andy Beshear, Gavin Newsom, Mark Kelly. He's another really strong candidate, I think. These are all white men, That's something I think that we need to focus on a bit too as a party, is being less focused on that. That's not the only deal maker, right? But at the same time, I do think that we could use more diversity within politics and more perspective.
I'll give you a name along those lines. Wes Moore out in Maryland. Governor Moore is like, if you're listening and you're interested and you're a wonk nerd like us, go watch any speech interview from Wes Moore, especially the ones where he goes into CNBC, Squawk Box, that environment. Dude is an ace. He's turned that state around, extremely pragmatic. I believe, Airborne, maybe SEAL, one or the other. Brilliant. Josh Smead, architect from Northwest Missouri 6 candidate primary. Thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, JB. I really enjoyed it. This is great.
Yeah, I will. For those of you listening, thank you for getting to this point. Do us a favor, like, review, follow, share. All that stuff's free. I got low self-esteem, so all those little clicks helps out. Be sure to follow Josh and his campaign on Facebook, and if you're in the district, shoot him questions. He'll answer them. Good luck in the primary, and
Thank you.
we'll be in touch, man.
Thank you. Yeah, it's worth saying to your listeners, check your voter registration, check your friends' voter registration, and get ready for 2026. It's going to be a good year.
Awesome. Until next time, JB here. I'm on my way out. See ya.